So, Trudy, your story in tarbell.org is fascinating, and at one point, your I guess your editor, your publisher, or the founder of Tarbell, Wendell Potter, who we've spoken to on this program many times, chimes in and talks about how well versed and how well experienced you were as a writer and reporter on healthcare issues. And it is fascinating to read your story of your catastrophic health event and how it changed your perspective on what you wrote about. And so let's just start with the basic outlines of the story. Before we go into some of the insights that you gained by being a patient in this system that you had written about for so long.
Oh, of course. I was a very healthy individual. I still am because I've made a full recovery, which probably helped me a lot get through this. If I had had some underlying problem, it might have been a different outcome. But for some reason, I picked up an infection. My theory was it was a urinary tract infection that didn't quite go away. And I had to have 2 rounds of an antibiotic for it, which I had taken many times over the course of many years. It wasn't something, new to my body, but probably the 2 doses were too many. And I ended up with aplastic anemia, which is a pretty dreadful disease since your blood system is shot. You don't have any cells and no way to make red cells and white cells and everything else that you need. So my feeling is that when the blood system failed, then I was susceptible to pneumonia and then eventually sepsis. And everything at that point just cascaded. So a year ago, this past November, I found myself one Saturday morning, really, where I just really couldn't function. And as the day wore on, my husband called, got very concerned, and he ended up calling 911. And then the EMS folks came, and the only thing I remember from them is that they were real big guys, and they strapped me to a gurney, and I remember thinking, I'm finally safe. I must have felt very unsafe as I was declining in function and health, and being wheeled out of the apartment. And that was it. And that's all I remembered for at least 2 months. Or it was about 2 months.
Okay, and so we should say that you slipped into a coma. But before we get to in that day, had you been diagnosed with anything at that point? And we should say sepsis. I don't know if everyone is familiar with it. It is essentially an infection in your blood, and my understanding is, and I've had, someone close to me go through a similar experience with pneumonia, is that if you get to the hospital within a certain period of time, with a certain amount of sepsis, and you get enough antibiotics at that moment, we could be talking just like a number of hours would make the difference between surviving and not surviving. Is that the case?
I know that New York has certain regulations regarding sepsis, and I believe that the hospitals have to test for it every so many minutes or every hour. I don't remember the exact regulation, but looking back on that and looking at the hospital record, it was pretty clear that that was going on, and that may have had an effect on the outcome. They must have been doing something at that point that was positive. But they did tell my husband fairly early on in this whole process that it was going to be touch and go, and that I was very sick, and that I really had very little hope, except that they wanted to give me these immunosuppressive drugs, I think on the third day I was there. And that had to suppress whatever was left of my own blood system and then regenerate it and have it come back. And that's probably was the key to survival in the long run.
Okay, so this thing comes on very quickly. You begin to, I guess I don't want to say lose consciousness, but begin to get pretty foggy. You are taken to the hospital. You slip into a coma for a couple of months. What happens then? And let's start to try and work in, I guess, what is as you look back on this experience, obviously, you're in the midst of it. Well, I guess let me ask you this. While you were in the midst of this experience, how much were you sort of stepping out and looking at it as a writer of healthcare? How much were you just living it as opposed to, down the road, then looking back in retrospect?
Well, for the first 2 months, I really wasn't conscious of anything. But when I came to, and I was at a very different hospital in a different state at that point, I just suddenly woke up one day and I said, where am I? What happened to me? And I felt my hands and I realized I could still be a journalist. And that was the first thing I thought of. And then people started telling me what had happened. And my first thought was just one of disbelief. I mean, how could this possibly have happened to me? I was perfectly healthy. But as the longer I stayed in the hospitals, and I had 2 months where I was awake and I was able to observe what was going on, I would say it was probably a combination of both, to answer your question. It was bringing to bear what I knew, that hospitals generally are unsafe places, and what families need to do. Of course, my family was on top of it. They knew what to do the best they could. I mean, they had people to call. They knew what to do more than most families do. And then I started really sort of taking over my care as much as I could and objecting when things didn't look right. And I couldn't talk for a very long time because I had a trach in me to facilitate breathing. And that, because of the difficulty of getting it out and miscommunication with the facility and the doctor who was supposed to take it out and a bunch of stuff like that, I had it in longer than necessary. And it's a very uncomfortable apparatus to have in you because you can't really cough up the mucus that comes with it. It's just very difficult, and you think you can't breathe lots of times. So someone handed me a clipboard, and I began writing my thoughts and my observations. And at first I thought, I don't want to have anything more to do with this, hospital. I don't want to write about it anymore. I'm finished. But that lasted about a week, maybe two, and then I thought, no, I've got something to say, and I'm going to keep at this. And I had my notebook, so to speak, and I just kept taking notes. So I knew what was going on and was able to record things that I didn't like, and sometimes there were, some nice things that I wrote down too.
All right. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk more about some of the things that you learned from your stay that may be a surprise to you, even having had a career in writing about healthcare. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back with Trudy Lieberman after this.